The shadowed throne. A hush fell over the throne room as dawn's first light filtered through the high windows. Dust motes danced in the golden sunbeams, and in that moment, King Dain realized Eldoria was at peace, for now. How fleeting such silences could be. Only weeks had passed since he and his companions had restored the shattered crown and cast down the necromancer Malakar. The spectre of undead armies and cursed magic no longer loomed over the kingdom's every breath. At least, not in plain sight. Dain rose from the throne and allowed himself a moment to take in the changes he had overseen since his coronation. Ornate tapestries, newly woven, depicted the unity between humans, elves, and dwarves. Stone masons labored daily to patch the damage across the city walls, while knights patrolled roads still scarred by war. Orders had gone out to the dwarven hold of Ironhold and the elven glades of Verdant Glade, welcoming their healers, tradesmen, and scholars into Eldoria's capital. Each time Dain looked upon this tapestry of collaboration, he felt a warm surge of hope, but beneath it all, a sense of unease nipped at his thoughts. The knowledge that remnants of Malakar's evil could still be lurking in the shadows. He ran a hand through his hair, which had grown slightly longer than the strict night cuts of his youth. His eyes strayed to the base of the throne, where a marble statue of Liara stood. Her likeness was beautifully carved, arm raised as if weaving a spell. It was a tribute not only to her sacrifice in saving the kingdom, but to the strange, miraculous possibility that her spirit had not been wholly lost. Over these last weeks, rumors had drifted to Dain's ears, whispers that a silver-haired elf roamed the distant borders, defending villages from the stray undead. Some called it mere superstition, others believed it was Liara's ghost. Dain knew better than to dismiss the possibility. His final glimpse of a cloaked figure outside the newly unveiled statue had filled him with an uneasy blend of dread and hope. A sudden knock at the grand doors shook him from his reverie. The heavy oak swung open, and Brom entered, his squat, muscular frame dressed in a blacksmith's apron and a simple shirt. Though he now held the title of Royal Armourer, he still preferred the attire and comfort of a working forge master. His fiery beard gleamed with fresh soot, as though he had come straight from the anvil. "Good morning, Your Majesty," Brom said with a curt bow that seemed at odds with the old camaraderie they shared. Dain smiled, stepping down from the dais. "How many times must I tell you to call me by my name when we're alone, Brom?" Brom let out a small chuckle. "You're a king now. Old habits die hard." His voice dropped in seriousness. "I bring troubling news." Those words banished the warmth that had momentarily warmed Dain's heart. "Speak." "One of our western outposts sent a messenger this morning. Reports of dark magic, twisted creatures. Traces of the same foul powers we faced in the cursed citadel." Dain's pulse quickened. "So soon?" Brom nodded grimly. "It seems so." Just as Brom finished speaking, a runner, a young squire with sweat matting his hair, rushed into the hall, bearing a sealed parchment. Dain recognized the wax sigil, an eagle with outstretched talons, the outpost's crest. He took it, broke the seal, and scanned the letter. The message was terse but unmistakable. A resurgence of necromantic forces had been spotted in remote hamlets near the western road. Worse, travelers reported sightings of a strange noble whose entourage wore black and silver livery, making promises to local bandits and mercenaries. Rumor claimed these mysterious agents bore the same arcane tattoos as Malakar's minions. Dain felt a chill. "We've only just begun to restore order. We can't let a new threat fester." Brom agreed. "No, we can't. The Council of Unity needs to hear this. With dwarves and elves on alert, we can investigate quickly." Steeling himself, Dain swept from the throne room. He would call upon the council and then lead an expedition westward. If foul magic threatened Eldoria anew, he intended to face it head-on before it grew into another calamity. New beginnings, lingering wounds. Word of new dangers spread through Eldoria like wildfire. By midday, the Council of Unity, composed of dwarven delegates from Ironhold, elven envoys from the Verdant Glade, and high-ranking human stewards, convened in the newly rebuilt Great Hall. Tension crackled in the air. Some dwarves muttered that they had hardly finished burying their dead from the last battle, while elven representatives worried about the fragile recovery of their forests. The humans, still reeling from border raids, fretted that the populace's faith in King Dain's rule might waver if the kingdom slipped back into war. A robust but uneasy debate ensued. Should Eldoria raise a massed army and march west at once? Or should a smaller, more agile force go and confirm the rumors? Dain weighed the arguments carefully. Marshalling every knight at Eldoria's disposal would leave other regions vulnerable. Better, he decided, to send a swift strike team led by himself to verify the threat. If necessary, he would call for reinforcements. The council reluctantly agreed. By evening, a small retinue of hand-picked knights, a few skilled dwarven warriors, and 2 elven rangers prepared for departure at the city's gates. Dain slipped away briefly to the courtyard where Liara's statue stood, bathed in lantern light. He pressed his hand to its cold marble surface, remembering the rush of light that had accompanied her sacrifice. "If you're out there," he whispered, "I could use your help. The realm needs you." The statue offered no reply, but a gentle breeze caused a torch flame to flicker. Dain sighed, placed a lily at her feet, and hurried to rejoin his retinue. Second, whispers in the west. The journey west began under a waning moon. The roads outside the capital still bore marks of violence. Burnt homesteads, trampled farmland, and lonely grave mounds. Yet the farther they rode, the more they encountered the slow stirrings of renewed life. Thatched roofs being repaired, fields replanted, and cautious smiles from villagers as the king's party passed. The seeds of hope were taking root, though they needed protection to truly flourish. On the second day, they came upon a half-ruined watchtower near a crossroad. A group of refugees huddled within the crumbling walls waved them down. Their faces were drawn with fear. "It's the bandits," croaked an old man, eyes hollow. "But they're not the same rabble we've dealt with before. They've got new weapons, strange sigils. Some carry a smell of death about them." "Could you recognize these sigils?" Dain asked gently, kneeling by the man. The old man nodded, describing silver runes shaped like jagged, twisting branches. Brom, listening intently, swore under his breath. "Those runes sound akin to the dark script Malakar used to mark his abominations," he muttered, "but not quite the same." Dain sent the refugees with a small escort back towards safer territory. Then he and the others pressed on. Later that evening, as twilight bled into the horizon, the retinue was ambushed. Arrows hissed from behind rocky outcroppings, striking the ground in front of them. A ragged band of raiders emerged, brandishing swords etched with those eerie silver markings. There were only a dozen or so, but their eyes burned with frenzied conviction. Dain quickly raised his sword in a defensive stance, and the knights formed a shield wall. Brom let out a roar and charged, hammer held high. The clang of metal on metal reverberated across the road. Dain parried a thrust from a snarling bandit, only to see up close that the man's pupils glowed faintly red, as though some arcane influence had corrupted him. Meanwhile, a pair of elven rangers loosed precise arrows from behind Dain's line, felling those who attempted to flank the knights. Just when the tide seemed to turn, 3 more bandits emerged atop a ridge, leveling crossbows. A volley of bolts whistled downward, and one of Dain's knights cried out, dropping to the dirt. Fury exploded in Dain. He readied himself to charge the ridgeline when an unexpected arrow from the darkness took one crossbowman in the throat. Another arrow slammed into the second raider's shoulder, sending him tumbling. The third, startled, scrambled behind a boulder. A hooded archer appeared at the crest, backlit by the bruised sky. They fired again, driving the final raider to flight. Then, in a fluid motion, this ally turned and vanished into the gloom. By the time Dain subdued his opponent and looked up, the mysterious archer was gone, leaving only faint footprints in the dust. He had recognized an elven grace in the posture, a lethal precision reminiscent of Liara's casting, but he could not be certain. Once the raiders were either captured or slain, the party took a moment to recover. One knight, wounded in the side, was stabilized by a dwarven warrior who had some herbal training. Dain and Brom examined the bandits' weapons. Each blade had the same arcane lines, a lesser form of dark magic. If these men had once been ordinary thieves, they had become pawns in something more sinister. Brom turned to Dain, voice low. Whoever armed them did so with knowledge gleaned from Malakar's forbidden craft. We must be dealing with someone who got their hands on Malakar's writings or artifacts. Dain nodded grimly. And that someone is drawing rogues and bandits under their banner, promising them power. He gazed into the distance where the hooded archer had vanished. We have allies in the shadows too, it seems. Third return of the lost. Word of a silver-haired elf defending villagers from stray undead had echoed through these lands. Dain tried not to let hope or fear consume him, but every time he glimpsed a flash of pale hair among tree lines, his heart raced. On the 4th day, a caravan from a coastal fishing town recounted a sighting. A woman with silvery hair had turned back a horde of shambling corpses at dusk, vanishing before dawn. The next morning, Dain's retinue reached a small farmstead that lay in ruin. No living souls remained. Smoke still drifted from blackened timbers. Searching for survivors, Dain found evidence of a terrible skirmish. Half-burned undead corpses, bandit footprints, and a single arrow with white fletching lodged in the chest of a ghoul. It matched the style of the mysterious archer who had aided them days earlier. As they gathered in the barren yard, Brom suddenly tensed. We're not alone. Shadows flickered behind the charred remains of a barn. Dain pulled his sword. Show yourself. Slowly, a cloaked figure stepped from the gloom. The hood dropped back, revealing pale cheeks and silvery hair braided in an elven style. Liara, or someone wearing her face. Her eyes glowed with a faint luminescence, cautious, guarded, and yet vulnerable. The sight made Dain's breath catch in his throat. He opened his mouth to speak, but Liara preempted him. Lower your weapons. I'm not here to fight you. A stunned hush fell. Brom's hand loosened on his hammer. Liara, but how? She offered a sad smile. I wish I had answers. The magic that took my life also bound me to something else. I awoke weeks ago in a ruined temple near the cursed citadel, called back by a force neither wholly good nor evil. Her expression clouded. I've been wandering ever since, drawn to places corrupted by Malakar's magic, trying to prevent more harm. One of the knights whispered a prayer, as though standing before a ghost. Dain slowly sheathed his sword. So, it is truly you. She looked pained. In mind and memory, I believe so. In spirit, I'm not certain. But I know we share the same goal, to keep Eldoria safe. Before Dain could speak further, a flicker of fear crossed her features. She glanced over her shoulder as if sensing some distant threat. I cannot stay long. These bandits and undead are controlled by one who styles himself Lord Alvaren. He's found fragments of Malakar's research or artifacts. He aims to gather power and rule these western lands. Perhaps more. I've tried to disrupt his plans, but I'm only one person. Dain stepped forward. Fight with us again. We can face this threat together. She pressed her lips into a thin line. I wish it were so simple, but the curse that once nearly consumed me is still here. She raised her right arm where faint scars traced the path of the black mark that had once tainted her. I fight his influence day and night. If I come too close to Alvaren's artifact, I risk losing control. For now, I must remain apart. Brom cursed softly. Alvaren, the name is familiar. A lesser noble from the southwestern fiefs. He chafed under King Aldric, if memory serves. Dain's mind spun. Alvaren had once been rumored to dabble in taboo magic, but he'd vanished after Aldric's death. It seemed he had re-emerged, bearing secrets best left buried. Tell us where he is, Dain said quietly. Liara recounted rumors pointing to an old fortress along the western cliffs. Alvaren calls it the Western Keep now. He's fueling his twisted experiments with energies harnessed from a remnant of Malakar's staff. She turned her eyes to Dain. Be careful, or you risk facing a new necromancer. She stepped away, as though preparing to vanish into the mist. Dain, desperation in his voice, pleaded, stay with us, at least until we reach the keep. We can find a way to contain this dark influence. Her gaze softened, but she shook her head. Not yet. My path is bound to the lingering corruption across these borderlands. If I sense your greatest need, I will come. Until then, trust no one who bears that staff fragment. Its corruption runs deeper than you know. In a rush of movement, she disappeared into a copse of charred trees, leaving Dain and Brom speechless. The knights murmured to one another, some believing her an angel returned, others suspecting a trap. But Dain and Brom both felt in their bones that Liara truly stood before them once more, changed, but real. The fourth western keep. Determined to strike swiftly, Dain led his retinue farther west. The terrain grew more rugged, with jagged cliffs dropping into a stormy sea. Coastal winds battered them, carrying the tang of salt. Locals in a nearby fishing village directed them to a looming fortress perched on a promontory. It had once been a loyal outpost of Eldoria, but all recognized that silhouette as the Western Keep. As they drew closer, they saw flickers of eerie light along the ramparts. No banners flew, except a tattered black standard. Dain ordered his knights to spread out, scanning for signs of undead or mortal guards. They found both. Undead sentries, their skeletal faces blank, patrolled alongside living soldiers in black and silver tabards. The walls were high and well fortified. They made camp in the lee of a rocky outcropping, out of sight. Brom, Dain, and 2 elven rangers carefully scouted under cover of darkness, creeping up to the outer walls. They heard muffled chanting carried on the night breeze. From a half-collapsed portion of the fortress, they glimpsed a courtyard within. A tall figure in elaborate plate armor paced the parapets, barking orders. Even at a distance, Dain discerned an aura of cold authority. Lord Alvaren, presumably. Moonlight revealed altars erected along the courtyard's edges, each inscribed with runes reminiscent of Malakar's books. A swirl of pale, sickly light emanated from them. Brom gripped the hilt of his hammer, rage simmering in his eyes. He's turning this keep into a temple of dark magic. They retreated to the temporary camp, formulating a plan. A full assault would be risky. The fortress sat on cliffs that offered no easy route for large-scale siege engines. It seemed infiltration was the best option. Slip in, sabotage these altars, and break Alvaren's hold on his undead legion. Then call in reinforcements to secure the keep. a confrontation and revelation. Under moonless skies, the infiltration began. Dain and Brom led a small strike force toward the collapsed section of wall, while the elven rangers scaled the cliffs to find vantage points. The knights waited in reserve, ready to charge once the gates opened. The wind whipped at cloaks and carried the roar of waves crashing below. Inside, the courtyard was silent but for the crackle of braziers. The rotting stench of undead mingled with the tang of salt air. Dain pressed himself against a broken column, scanning for sentries. As he signaled for Brom to move forward, the dwarven blacksmith nearly tripped over a corpse, a soldier in black and silver livery, eyes wide with terror. A barbed spear jutted from his abdomen, the runes on his own armor burnt away. Something else had killed him. They found the main altar near the fortress's central keep. A monstrous wraith lord, wrapped in ragged cloaks, guarded it. Its eyes glowed a baleful green, and with a screech, it lunged, brandishing a rusted halberd. Brom threw himself forward, hammer clashing against spectral steel. Dain circled, sword angled to strike if the wraith exposed an opening. Sparks of necrotic energy erupted each time Brom's hammer struck home, swirling around the courtyard in malevolent streams. At the same time, a side door burst open, and half a dozen living guards poured in, weapons raised. Dain shouted for his knights. From beyond the courtyard walls, the clang of steel and the shout of men signaled that the main gate had been breached. The infiltration had become open battle. Amid the tumult, Dain spotted Lord Alvaren at the far end of the courtyard. He was tall, his plate armor etched with arcane lines. In his gauntleted hand, he clutched what looked like a jagged fragment of obsidian, the remains of Malakar's shattered staff. A toxic green glow pulsed within it, illuminating his face twisted with ambition. "You must be the upstart king," Alvaren sneered, voice carrying over the din. "Do you truly believe Eldoria can be saved by unity alone? Power, not unity, will rule these realms." Dain advanced cautiously. "You poison the land with necromancy. I won't let you repeat Malakar's evil." Alvaren laughed. "Malakar was a fool who bound himself too tightly to the crown's fate. I require no crown, only knowledge and the will to bend death itself to my service." As if on cue, a wave of necrotic force erupted from the staff fragment, coalescing into more undead forms along the edges of the courtyard. Brom, finishing off the Wraith Lord with a thunderous strike, ran to Dain's side. Together, the dwarf growled, "We end this!" They clashed. Alvaren fought with a cold, refined skill, parrying Dain's strikes with ease. The staff fragment glowed, channeling foul power into each blow. Brom darted in to hammer Alvaren's flank, but the noble conjured a swirling barrier of dark energy, repelling him. Undead minions lunged at Brom. Snarling, he knocked them back, even as more advanced. In the midst of the chaos, the elven rangers began targeting the altars. Their arrows struck the runic carvings, causing sparks of brilliance as the foul energies faltered. Step by step, they dismantled the arcane field, fueling the undead horde. A few of Dain's knights managed to open the gates fully, allowing more reinforcements to flood inside. Yet every time they pressed the advantage, Alvaren unleashed another wave of necromantic might. That was when a piercing cry echoed above them. Dain's heart leapt as he glimpsed a figure balanced on the upper ramparts. Silver hair whipping in the wind, Liara, she knocked an arrow, chanting words in Elvish. An aura of bright white light gathered at her fingertips, an uncanny blend of life and shadow. The arrow loosed, streaking through the air and piercing Alvaren's barrier. The impact cracked the swirling shield of darkness long enough for Dain to strike. Steel collided with Alvaren's gauntlet, sending the staff fragments skittering across the courtyard. A ragged shriek tore from Alvaren's throat. He stumbled, a look of fury twisting his handsome features. Before he could recover, Liara vaulted down from the ramparts, landing in a crouch. Dark energy flickered across her arm, fighting the brilliant magic she channeled. For an instant she hesitated. Her eyes glowed with an inner struggle, as if she feared losing control. Alvaren's gaze darted between the lost staff fragment and the two warriors. Desperation flared in his voice. "I will not be undone by a disgraced knight and a cursed elf." He lunged for the fragment, but Brom intercepted him with a brutal strike to the back of the knee. Alvaren collapsed, howling in agony. Sixth, the battle for Eldoria's future. At that moment, the Wraith Lord reappeared, regenerated by the swirling magic. It lunged for Liara, aiming to tear her apart. She spun gracefully, unleashing an elven spell that cascaded silvery flames across the Wraith's form. The creature shrieked in agony as the flames burned away the necrotic shell, revealing the Wraith's true essence. Liara's face contorted as the swirling dark energy within her threatened to mix with the spell's radiant force, sending flickers of black lightning dancing along her skin. She fought for control, and with a final cry, the Wraith Lord disintegrated into embers. Dain and Brom seized Alvaren, pinning him to the ground. The noble spat curses and tried to conjure a final necromantic surge. But with his staff fragment out of reach and the altars under fire from the elven rangers, his power faltered. Brom planted a heavy boot on Alvaren's chest as the knights formed a circle. "It's over," Dain said, leveling his sword at Alvaren's throat. Yet the noble only laughed bitterly. "You think you've won. I've only cracked open the door Malakar once held ajar. Another will stride through, someone with true might, and Eldoria will drown in shadow." Dain's grim expression did not waver. He gestured, and two knights hauled Alvaren to his feet, manacling him. In the courtyard, the undead either collapsed or wandered aimlessly, no longer under direct control. The dwarven warriors smashed the altars one by one, each explosion of runes flaring and then dying. The keep's defenders, those still loyal to Alvaren, threw down their arms or fled. By the time dawn's first rays painted the eastern sky, the fortress was firmly in Dain's hands. Seventh, Aftermath and New Horizons. Exhausted and victorious, the king's retinue set about cleaning the western keep of its foul remnants. Alvaren, stripped of his armor, was placed under heavy guard. Once the staff fragment was secured in an iron-bound chest warded by dwarven runes, the swirling necromancy that had plagued the coastline began to dissipate. Yet amid the relief, a new worry took root in Dain. Alvaren's last words echoed in his thoughts. Another will stride through. Dark magic still existed in Eldoria. Artifacts and scraps of Malakar's notes might be scattered in hidden corners, each a potential time bomb. Would the kingdom endure future attempts by power-hungry lords or unseen evils? Within a day, the fortress was being resupplied by local fisherfolk, now cautiously returning under the king's protection. Brom oversaw the destruction of all unholy symbols, forging new implements from the molten scraps. The dwarven smith hammered away at a blazing forge in the keep's courtyard, each strike a vow that he would never again allow his craft to serve corruption. While knights cleared out Alvaren's private chambers, Dain ascended a flight of stairs to the ramparts. There, overlooking the crashing sea, he found Liara. She stood with her back to him, her silver hair shining in the sun, arms braced on the parapet. He could sense her struggle as if it were a physical presence in the salty air. She seemed both part of this world and beyond it. He cleared his throat. "I had hoped, when we fought together, that you'd stay, rejoin us. Let the healers find a way to free you from whatever binds you." She smiled faintly, turning her luminous eyes upon him. If only it were so simple. The magic that brought me back is not entirely mine. It's like a tether to the realm's shadowy corners. If I stay in one place too long, the darkness within me might fester. My presence could do more harm than good. Dain wanted to argue, to insist that he would risk it. But he recalled her moment of near collapse during the battle, the swirl of black lightning that threatened to devour her. He could not condemn her to a worse fate than death. "Then what will you do?" he asked softly. "I'll wander," Liara replied. "There are still pockets of undead, twisted beasts, and relics brimming with Malakar's legacy. My path is to root them out, and if ever Eldoria faces another great peril, I will return." Dain swallowed the lump in his throat. "We owe you everything. Again." She reached out, resting a slim hand on his gauntleted wrist. "Just live up to the king Eldoria needs, Dain. Protect our people, keep the alliances strong. That is all I ask." Gulls cried overhead. Wind whipped her cloak. She pulled away, stepping back from the parapet. "Farewell, King Dain. May the light guide your steps." Before he could find the words to stop her, Liara scaled a section of crumbled wall and disappeared down the far side, bounding from stone to stone with graceful ease. Just like that, she was gone, leaving only the whisper of her name on the wind. Dain lingered there, staring at the place she had stood. His heart ached, torn between gratitude and regret. Over the next hours, he oversaw the final tasks of reclaiming the western keep. When the day was done, the fortress's battered gates now bore the sigil of Eldoria, flanked by the combined crests of the dwarves and elves, a symbol of renewed alliance. Epilogue. By the week's end, Lord Alvaren was taken to the capital in chains, his dark artifact locked away in dwarven-guarded vaults. There would be a public trial, though his guilt was beyond question. Dain ordered the staff fragments sealed, and the keep turned into a vigilant outpost. From now on, Eldoria would maintain watchers on every coast and border, scanning for any sign of dark sorcery. In the days that followed, King Dain returned to his seat of power, the shattered crown gleaming on his brow. A crown no longer broken, but made stronger by the trials it had endured. The city greeted him and Brom as heroes once more, though their hearts bore the scars of another conflict. A new monument was erected in the courtyard, a simple obelisk inscribed with the names of those who fell to Alvaren's madness. Dain insisted that every soldier, human, dwarf, and elf, be honored equally. Late one afternoon, as the setting sun turned the sky blood orange, Dain found himself again before Liara's statue. The swirl of her marble cloak and the proud tilt of her chin captured her spirit well. He remembered how she had looked on the western keep's ramparts, resolute, powerful, and heartbreakingly alone. Placing a hand on the statue, he whispered, "I hope you find peace out there. And if not peace, then purpose." Somewhere beyond the city walls, amidst rolling plains or tangled forests, Liara walked a solitary path. Darkness still hid in the corners of the land, stirring in the aftermath of Malakar's downfall. Yet she had proven that, even bound by a curse, she would not let Eldoria fall to a new evil. One day, should a new threat rise, the silver-haired elf would likely appear again, an echo of hope in a world too often ravaged by shadow. And so, Eldoria continued its renewal, buoyed by the alliances Dain had fought so hard to preserve. The dwarves of Ironhold and the elves of the verdant glade helped rebuild roads, revive farmland, and share knowledge of both steel and sorcery. In taverns and hearths, travelers told tales of the restless spirit of an elven sorceress, forever vigilant against corruption, and while no one knew when or if the necromantic tide might surge again, they took comfort in the knowledge that heroes, both crowned and wandering, stood ready to defend the realm. Over the capital's skyline, the same sun that once rose on a broken kingdom now shone on a realm slowly mending. And in the hush before twilight, if one listened closely, the wind carried both a reminder of past sacrifice and a promise of a future worth protecting.